Hi, David Vizard here. You guys are watching PowerTec 10. In this edition, we are going to take a serious look at intercoolers for turbocharged and supercharged engines. So let's get cracking here. Now I have to say, a lot of what I'm going to show you here has been inspired by the tests I've seen on other channels, and one in particular is hosted by Charles Cerrito, who hails from Factory Function Performance in Phoenix, Arizona. Now, I don't know much about the company, but I do know that Charles is very enthusiastic about hop-ups on YouTube. He's got 243 videos out and counting. So, if you want to get some, how shall I say, inspiration, that might be a good channel to go to. But anyway, one of his pet sayings about intercoolers, and he'll demonstrate this on several videos, is bigger is always better. Exactly, Charles. I agree wholeheartedly. Now, before we go diving in onto the intercooler's cooling capability, we need to look at an aspect which, for some reason or another, seems rarely dealt with on intercoolers discussed here on YouTube channel. The one thing that we were looking for was not only a better cooling ability, but a better airflow. Let me show you what's going on with the stock intercooler here, and you'll see that its airflow characteristics, as dictated by the end caps on the intercooler, are not good for airflow. And we'll look at some airflow numbers later, but right now let's just investigate it. The Euro compulsion one has approximately 3 times the volume and 3 times the cooling fin area that the stock one has, so we're hoping that that makes a big difference. Plus, it should have more airflow capability, so that should be a power gain from that aspect alone. Now, it's a bit difficult to see, but if you look at the back of the cooler here, you'll see that there's a slight ridge here, but if you look inside, that ridge comes up, right angle turn. It's the same both sides. It affects flow going into a small amount, but the flow coming out has to fight its way over that ridge. Result, a big flow impediment. It's like having a carburetor without a ram stock on it. Here's another view here. So you can see there's not much spec. The air's going in like that, and it has to make a turn here to go up these channels here, right? That's a difficult turn to make. So not only have we got a small intercooler here, it's not good on flow. I'll show you the numbers later. Now let's take a look at the one we are going to install. You will see that there is much more expansion and no turns bigger than a right angle, but then made with a curve on the inside to make that turn for the air easier. This is the one we decided on based on that basis. Now, there are a couple of other intercoolers out there that also have the same characteristics, but we went with this one because it's a stepped intercooler, and therefore it doesn't block as much of the top of the radiator. So it's, in terms of height, it's shorter, but in terms of cooling capacity, it has 3 times the cooling capacity of the stock intercooler. Let's just take a look at that one. Now, as you can see from the inlet pipe, on this side it spreads into this kind of pre-plenum here quite smoothly, and here, instead of taking a 120 degree turn, it's only taking about a 40 degree turn, and it's radiused on the inside of this turn here. So that makes it a smoother flow, a much smoother flow into this pre-plenum area. From here, it spreads out into a much greater area. It spreads out, giving this plenum, the flow from this plenum, a much greater access area here into the fins. From here we can see that this pre-plenum area dumps into a major plenum area here, and thus from here to this area here we see that air has a much greater access to the top fins of the intercooler. It's no good having intercooler area if the air can't get to that area. We have got to get our ass in gear.
Wide open.
That's going to mean that we've probably got to sacrifice some other projects. I've still got to get some head work done for your Crown Vic here.
I ain't worried about the Crown Vic.
But anyway, here we are, folks. Right now we're sitting at about 320 odd horsepower at the wheels. However, it doesn't have any mods which I consider to be safety mods.
No.
Does it? So we are putting on a giant intercooler.
Yeah, because the last time we was at the track, this thing was getting heat soaked very fast.
Yeah. And the reason I think we're slower than the GTs in the lights, although we get there quicker, is that we start off with more horsepower to weight ratio, but as we get towards the end of the track, that puny little intercooler
goes up in heat.
Goes up in heat and it retards ignition. We can beat a GT ET wise now by probably a couple of tenths of a second.
Easy.
But
the mile per hour.
Consistently about 4 miles an hour slower. On the one run that I did against the GT, he actually came off the line better than me.
Yeah.
And in the next like 100 yards, I put a car's length on him.
Yeah.
In the lights, I was about an inch in front of him.
It was close.
But he was nearly 5 miles an hour faster.
Yeah.
Yet in the mid-range, I could close on him absolutely no problem. Now, if I'd have continued to do that, I would have gone through the lights probably 2 cars lengths in front of him.
So what we've got to do is we've got to get this thing up on jack stands. You know, these new cars, they're like snap-type models. For you young folks, you don't even know what a snap-together model is, but I got to get this front fascia off, and then we have this large intercooler here from Euro Compulsion, right?
Grab the water injection tank there.
Oh yeah, we didn't even talk about that yet.
Yeah, let's bring that out. This is something quite novel here. In Japan,
see this? It looks like a plastic tank.
Water injection is not allowed, or any tanks. Look, it's disguised
as a speaker box.
Right.
So that's pretty cool.
So
a little bit of a
we
sleeper
are putting water injection on here. Now this is a new system. We've got probably the second one that's going to be installed in the US. The point is this: the motor can be way off tune and still be safe.
Yeah.
Because like I said in that water injection video I did, water injection is the best and cheapest octane booster you can ever have. Basically, we can cool the charge and put the octane up to 150, no problem. So we're not going to melt a piston.
Another thing I want to talk about, you talked about the Crown Vic. We're having to prioritize projects. Like, we're knee deep in the Whispering Warrior, the Mustang here. I'm knee deep in Casper in getting a transmission swap. So what that means is the Crown Vic has been put on the back burner.
Believe it or not, this car has only got just coming up for 2,500 miles on it, and it's 14 months old. And the thing is except for a 400-mile trip, the mileage on it is from here to the drag strip and back, plus whatever we do at the drag strip. So, hey, I'm 81 years old, I want to see this car achieve something on the drag strip. We've got a 7.5 second target.
Yeah.
Right, which we ought to be able to do. And I need it done now, because it's like, when you get to my age,
it's crunch time.
You don't need to leave things till tomorrow, because tomorrow
might not go.
Yeah. Here we go. We're going to make a start. Okay, Andy, let's get the jacks under.
The first order of business is we've got to get the Mustang up off the ground, because I've got to get underneath it and get the front fascia loose. We're using David's ultra cool hydraulic jack system. I would mention their name, but they said they didn't need any more publicity, so we'll leave it at that. But this is the first step in getting this front clip off. That should be enough for my big butt to get underneath the car. The first order of business is getting these plastic pull clips out. There's a total of 8. There's actually a special tool for this, but a small screwdriver, come in here, pry under the head, and pull it out. And that's all there is to it.
So, and we will be using new ones when we put it back.
But I always try to take care not to mar them or anything like that. Like I said, this is like a snap together model. Alright, once that plastic piece is off, then you have a total of 8 screws here. These are 8mm. I think these are 6 or 7mm, don't quote me on it, but get those out, and then I can go underneath the car and get in the wheel well, take the screws out there. There's two nuts on each side and the bottom fascia. So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to take the front wheel off. That way you'll get to come along for the ride and watch as I do it. Alright, these are 8mm screws that's across the top here. The outboard is actually a 7/32, but it's not. It's probably 5.5mm if my math is right. So just know that, that way you have the right tools to do it. Alright, now that the top screws are out, I'm going to take the wheel off.
Point to where the screws are going to be.
They're going to be in here. So I've got to take this piece loose. And there's 2 nuts up inside this fender. Alright, so we're about an hour and a half into this process. Mainly because David and I have been shooting the bull. And, but the front fascia.
And video.
And video, which takes time. So now once that's done, you pull it off the tabs up top. And,
it comes off like so.
Just like that. So the next bit of Detroit engineering that we're going to remove are these active vanes in here. These vanes are meant to get you extra miles per gallon at highway speed. It's debatable whether they work or not, but in our case it's dead weight and we're not going to need it with the new front fascia. Let's see here, we probably have some more clips.
Would appear there's a nut and screw at the back on the vertical blade actuator here. It's a bit fiddly to get at, but hey, it'll get done eventually.
Anybody can, if I can do it, anybody can. Now once we've got it out far enough, now I can get to the plug to disconnect it.
Here's where we are at present. Andy's just indicating the intercooler. Pretty small compared to the one we're going to put in its place.
Not only, David and I was just talking about this, not only is it causing a heat issue, but I also think this is a major flow restriction as well.
Yes,
what
it
do you
could well
think?
be. We will flow test that to find out. I don't know if anyone's flow tested them to see if that's the case.
Probably not. So what I've done next is remove the 10mm bolts holding the upper radiator mount, just to give a little bit of wiggle room so that I can get the room needed down below. So I think I've got it to a point where it's about ready to come out. There is a bolt on one side and a clip on the other. Let's see if I'm holding my mouth right. So it is completely loose. Alright, here we go. And this is the factory intercooler. Pretty pathetic.
Yes, to get these panels either side of the radiator out, you're going to have to temporarily pull out the diagonal bracing bar that you've just seen Andy undo.
Yeah.
And from there, if you wiggle it enough, you should be able to get it out.
Okay. You can cut that. There we go.
Yep, we've got it.
Yeah. The main thing is protecting the fins here.
Yeah. Now, what's that tube there?
That is for
Air.
your AC. That's the AC condenser or receiver dryer. Well, now you can get more creative with your air inlet.
Yeah. But that wire is the problem.
How's that the problem?
It might pull out the way now.
I believe we can, because I can see the harness up through there. We can do whatever we want to with it now. One of the things that we're going to reuse off of this intercooler is this sensor right here. This is very important. This is the air intake temperature sensor that goes into the new intercooler that tells the computer how hot the air is after it's been cooled. The sensor will go in this port right here on the new intercooler. This thing fits unreal. Greg, killer job. Alright, so what I'm going to do is get underneath it and slide the hoses onto it. Then I should be able to pull it up. That'll keep it from falling on me.
As you can see, we've got this far.
Did a pretty good job. I mean, Greg at Euro Compulsion, this thing fits like a glove. I was really surprised. We're a couple hours into it. So definitely you can do this at home with simple hand tools. We've been taking our time. So tell them about the rest of the combination that we're putting together.
The intercooler is the first thing as a safety factor. But we're also putting the water injection system on to absolutely remove any chance of detonation. That's one of the reasons why the Ecoboost engine has got this EcoBoom reputation deal. But that's not the only thing. Greg and I are going to do a little video on something that's other than burn pistons with the Ecoboost engine that may dissuade you from buying one that's earlier than 2018.
Yeah, that will be a good video. Another part of the equation is David has been porting a turbo. So we're going to use one of the stock turbos that you got from Greg.
Yeah.
He's going to do his port job to it. We're putting that on there. The car's actually going to get a real tune. And so that should be our 400 at the rear tires. What do you think?
Be. Greg is making a guess. He says minimum 20 horsepower on his turbo that I did.
Yeah.
The one I'm doing here, I'm making sure that the flap valve is more aerodynamic. I'm porting in through the two small ports.
It's pretty trick.
I'll show you, I'm sawing through a housing at the moment to show you what's inside.
Yeah, it's pretty trick. So I can't wait to see what this thing does.
Andy, also, there's a couple of moves on both the intake and exhaust which are so far off being obvious, and yet they'll only take a few minutes to do, and you only have to remove at the most about 1 cc of metal.
That's not bad.
But I'm going to show you how that's done. Well, I have a few more things to show you, but as far as the install here, if you're just doing the intercooler itself and no body modifications or anything like that, it's just a reverse of taking everything off. However, I'm doing a few more mods that aren't generally done. Surprise, surprise, DV's doing some mods that aren't generally done. Yes, this mod involves modifying this grill-mounted cold air intake. This area here is not too efficient at feeding the engine, so I'm going to change it to something which is much more functional. It's a mod that will pay dividends more the faster we go. To facilitate doing this air intake fitment, there are some changes you need to make to rerouting this cable I'm showing here. This will allow the form of the cold air intake to push straight in. Just take a look at what I'm saying here. This kink, you can't see it, but there's a kink in there, and it's for this wire to sit in. It isn't deep enough, and it constricts this area here, so I'm going to cut this piece out here so that this cable loom can sit further in, so that I can have no dimple in the air intake, and it'll come right out in that shape to about here. Let me take the liberty of defining what a dynamometer's functions are. Basically, we use it to measure the power output of the engine so that we can make a useful prediction of how much faster or how much better the vehicle that it's going to be installed will perform. Well, measuring the effect of intercoolers can be a little problematical because temperature variations cause, in this case, our baselines to swing all over the place. So we can actually define exactly what the horsepower is. Now, let's make sure we understand why we're searching for horsepower, so we have better performance, so that we can go faster down that drag strip or along that piece of road or whatever. And using a draggy, these are little boxes that you put in and it measures all the acceleration and all that, we can back calculate the horsepower. Now this is the effective change in power. That is the change in power as seen in practice on the racetrack or whatever performance arena we're performing in. That's what we did in this instance. It would have been nice to put it on the dyno and we would have tested with the draggy anyway, but the opportunity just did not arise. So what you've got here is, let's forget about horsepower numbers initially. Let's see what it does in the real world, because that's all at the end of the day that matters. And that's what we're going to look at. First off, we're going to look at a comparison between how well intercooler A cools the air compared with intercooler B. We're going to look at the flow change, and lastly, performance on the track. That's where ultimately it counts. So first, the intercooler's all-important cooling capability. Here's the setup I use to test the intercoolers for cooling capability. Yes, it is a pretty simple setup. Well, to be honest, it's a pretty crude setup. But since the situation will be the same for both intercoolers, it will give us a relative figure between the two, and should be a pretty accurate one. But let me explain what's all here. This cardboard box is here for no other reason than to keep this off the floor. This is a hopped up hairdryer. It's all been cleaned out in there and any obvious restrictions removed, and it's running on 130 volts instead of 110. This is a vacuum cleaner that's also been hopped up. No air filter in it. It's running on the same 130 volts that this runs on, and it's had some aerodynamic stuff done inside. It pulls, as it is now, about 300 CFM. So it's pulling enough air through here for the generation of something in the order of, I'm going to guess, about 80 to 100 horsepower. Here's our cooling fan. Just in front of it here, the airspeed is about 30 miles an hour. So that's the setup. So how did this conglomerate of parts work? I mean, talk about a Rube Goldberg setup, but actually it showed up some fairly substantial differences in the intercoolers. So I guess we can say, for the purposes involved here, it worked pretty well. Let's now look at the big intercooler and see how we got that going. Well, here's our setup here, all ready to go. I'm telling you this with it switched off because it does make a noise, but let me just get all this fired up and we'll see what our temperatures are. Now I should say at this point that the tests aren't done in an instant. There's a lot of metal in the big intercooler and there's a fair bit in the small intercooler. So to get these measurements stabilized, it was necessary, or I felt it was necessary, to run it for at least 10 minutes before we took measurements. So that's what was done. In fact, I think that it was probably nearer than 15 minutes for each of them. So now you know that little detail. Let's take a look at the results. 2 points to note here is the ingoing charge temperature at 114 and the outward bound temperature of 96. Just 18 degrees difference. Now you may think that that's a little on the low side, but that's due to the circumstances under which I tested it. Maybe if I did a lot of intercooler testing, I'd build a special rig which was a little more realistic. But rest assured, it does show the trends. Now let's look at the big Euro compulsion intercooler and see how that fares under these test conditions. Well, the numbers instantly show that this big intercooler is dumping heat out of the air much faster. 32 degrees difference between the intake and the outlet. And from the numbers in the boxes, you can see that it progressively cools faster across its face width. However, I don't think we were putting this intercooler under enough thermal stress to show its true capability. At this level of airflow and heat, it was just kind of taxiing along the runway, if you like. However, it's very obvious that this intercooler is much better than the stock one. But these numbers don't truly show the full worth. What we have to do now is flow test. Well, it may not look like anything special, but here's the setup I used to flow the stock converter. Yes, it does look like a Rube Goldberg fixture, but it turns out that this is a very awkward shape to mount on the bench. But anyway, enough of talking about it, let's flow test it. don't know if you heard me shouting over that noise, but 314 at 28 inches, and I'm blowing through it this way. Now on for the really awkward one. Unfortunately, we found it a little difficult. I say we, I had to get an assistant in on this. A little difficult to hold this big intercooler in place. So, there's no film video of it being done here. However, we did get the results, as you may have figured, so here they are. Our original one was 314. The Eurocomp one was 399. So that is almost 28% more flow. Now you may say, wait a minute, this thing's 3 times the size, it should flow more than that. The flow is limited by the pipe going into the intercooler. So that you've got an opportunity to see what that was worth, I calculated a perfect pipe would have flowed 556 CFM, and a simulated one on the test rig flowed just on 500. Now here's something to consider here. When you push that pipe onto the intercooler, be it the stock one or any modified one, the pipe comes down and has to go over the intercooler inlet pipe, and it leaves a step there. That step is highly destructive to flow. Now, I haven't done mine on the car, but what you should do is go round and trim it off so that it's a knife edge, so that the airflow comes down, it doesn't meet a step, it goes in. How much was that worth? About 15 CFM, believe it or not. Now, why haven't I done the one on the car? Because we fitted that one before we did the flow testing on a second intercooler. Here's the raw numbers so that you can see exactly what was produced. In all, considering the size of the intake pipe, a pretty good flow. When we couple that together with the fact that boost is going through here, and that we have a much greater cooling capacity from this, you can begin to see why this intercooler was pretty good on the job. Basically, we can say that the stock intercooler is running at a flow efficiency of some 63%, as opposed to 80% for the bigger one. Now remember, like I said, the limiting factor here is the pipe. So our big intercooler has way more flow capability than the pipes going in. So that's worth keeping note of. We might want to look at increasing pipe sizes on engines with high boost. It's not going to be a situation at the moment because I only flowed at 1.5 inches of mercury there. In practice, the blower boost probably won't exceed 30 psi. That's just over 60 inches of mercury. So we're going to be able to flow a considerable weight of air through that intercooler before we start to run into any problems. Now, if I was going to build a 1,000 horsepower engine, I would be looking at a custom built intercooler here. So it would have a bigger intake pipe, a bigger exit pipe, because it's feeding a bigger turbocharger, etc. So from where we are at the moment, we are in good shape with the Euro compulsion intercooler. Now let's have a look and see what kind of results we got. what have we just looked at? I think this is a demonstration that can show you that we really did make some big horsepower without quoting dyno numbers, which can be fudged, without quoting ETs on the drag strip, which could be fudged. What we had there was a grippy, dry road, no fluids on the ground to get the wheels spinning, and a drag strip start. Now I want you to know, by the time you see that car at the end of that run, it's already shifted up into third gear and still burning rubber. Now, you know what it takes to do that? Power. The setup I've got on my Mustang now will eat GTs alive, and I'm still getting 30 to the gallon. Right, so that's what we've got. That intercooler is working really good for us. So the lesson here is exactly as is quoted by other pros in the business of hopping up Ecoboost. The biggest cooler is the best. Well, now we've established that we do have plenty of horsepower from the work we've done with the intercooler. Let's talk about results on the drag strip. Now, if you've watched Andy's video from a couple of weeks back, you'll see that that we ran, as I show here, we ran an 8.15 at 89.59 miles an hour. So we were just shy of 90 miles an hour by 0.04 of a mile an hour. Now, how much horsepower does that represent? Well, using our trap speed to work this out, plus some runs with the draggy on the road, we established that that intercooler was worth somewhere on the low side at least 45 horsepower. On the high side, no more than 59. So I don't know, let's take the average of that. About 52 horsepower increase as demonstrated on the track. Now, where else can we go from here? Let's look at drivability. No downside there. It just felt like we had a bigger motor. It was like we'd gone from 2.3 litres to maybe 2.8. Just felt like a bigger engine. Now, the 8.15 time doesn't look that good for the power increase. No, it didn't. We never managed a good start. That was the problem. I am sure if we'd have managed a good start, we could have dipped this car into the 7-second range and cleared that 90 miles an hour. However, we've now got enough torque to make the start line the most critical part of our run. So we're going to have to look into that next. Anyway, that's enough for now. You can see this Euro compulsion intercooler was worth the money. Now, like I said, there's a couple of other intercoolers very similar with the stepped deal. I can't remember the brands now, but Euro compulsion's not your only brand, and I'm saying this because I don't want to look like I'm having favorites here. This intercooler was sent to me to test, and I tested it and then basically bought it. As I said earlier, it was paid for by parts, an exchange of parts and labor. So that's where we're at there. You might want to think about starting with Euro compulsion simply because they have an excellent, if not the best, downpipe on the market for getting cold air to the blower. And they have amongst, if not one of the best intercoolers. Oh, and the price is pretty good as well. I think you'll find the price is lower than anybody else's. But enough. We've established that we've got a deal here that's really going, and we'll have to now look into suspension and tires to get this car quicker. That doesn't mean that's immediately where I'm going to go, but that's high on the list. So until the next time, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like. It doesn't cost you anything. On the other hand, it costs us a fortune to do tests like this. 3 weeks it took me to do that test. If I've got the patience to do that, I'm sure you've got the time to just go like, subscribe. Hopefully you will. But thank you for watching anyway.